Now, South Africa is reaching crisis point, with many convinced that it's just a matter of time before it fails completely. A 15-year-old energy crisis has now been compounded by water shortages. Communities have been left with dry taps for weeks, if not months on end. Social activist Tessa Dooms says during such times, religious leaders cannot just sit back and be silent. She's challenged them in an opinion piece to take up the space and fight for peace and justice. She joins us this morning. Tessa, a very good morning to you, and a really interesting piece that you wrote there for Sowetan Live. And I was wondering, what is it that stimulated you to actually put pen to paper, specifically with this topic?
Thank you, Tammy. In the last month or so, we've all known about the Johannesburg fire, and I've watched that quite close and up front, and just seen the role of local activists and particularly faith leaders, both from the Christian faith and the Islamic faith, really rally behind the community of the 80 Albert Street fire. And that was really one of the first prompts, just reminding me. I also come from a religious family, and my father's a pastor, so just reminding me of the power and the need for religious leaders in times of crisis. But also in the last week, I've attended some gatherings of interfaith forums, a gathering in Cape Town of religious leaders, and having conversations about the state of the country. And I think it was just important to recognize that what religious leaders and faith leaders represent is more than just a moral compass. They represent community and a base for community in our society. We've seen in the census numbers this week that a high number of South Africans still subscribe to religion and faith. And in a time where our society doesn't have social cohesion, doesn't have many things that hold us together, religion and faith communities often have had that role, and I think must have that role even more strongly now, because really our point where we are is a demoralized nation with a lot of trauma, a lot of pain, and very little hope. And I think faith communities provide that in certain ways and can do that more intentionally if they put their minds to it.
Talk to us about some of the practical areas where religious leaders and people of faith can actually be active over and above the prayer. Because, yes, it's important to focus on the spirituality and the emotional well-being of people. But how can they move the needle further?
You know, the power of prayer is never to be underestimated, and the power of transcending, whether it is in terms of, traditional religious faiths, or even transcending in terms of our cultural beliefs and connecting to our ancestry, is never to be underestimated, because we really do need to know that there's more than just this lived experience that we're having right now sometimes. But, in the Christian tradition, they say faith without works is dead. And I think that we need to get to a point where faith leaders understand, number one, again, the role of building community is important. Faith leaders have the ability to rally people at a time of crisis, to support each other and be in solidarity of each other. And we've seen it again in the 80 Albert Street crisis, where faith leaders have been able to get people to supply food and supply clothing and other items. And there's just an easy sensibility around that when it comes to faith communities. But I think at a political level, and that was really the point I wanted to make in the article, faith leaders also are sitting at the nexus of people's power, sitting at the nexus of the greater sense of people's need and the greater sense of people's frustrations and hopes. And I think that there's an opportunity there to build power and build connection. In political spaces, we often say two things. One thing is that, politics is very personal. It affects our very, very personal lives. And so in local community settings, we're able to navigate and negotiate politics at a very personal level. But politics is also about building power with other people and realizing we're not alone. If you think about going to an election, for example, we often individualize the vote because we go alone to the voting station. But the power of the vote is actually in numbers. It's in being able to connect and be a part of a broader community of people that are voting in similar ways, and that gives us more power. And so faith communities can really harness that power. But the last thing that I think is really important is a sense of healing and a place of safety for our trauma, our shared trauma. This society is causing us great deals of pain and trauma, marginalization and not being seen. We are seeing mothers that are committing suicide and killing their children because of hunger. Faith communities can play a big role in terms of the healing practices that we need to have safe spaces for us to really work through this trauma and build power together.
Tessa, I'm quite interested to ask you this question because you'll know whenever there's a build-up to an election, what a lot of political leaders do is they will visit the churches. They'll visit different churches and they'll be given platforms to speak and to address the congregation. They probably visit mosques as well. What is your view about the relationship between faith leaders and politicians and the political sphere? Is there a line that should be drawn there? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about in a modern democracy the separation of church and state, of religion and state, and the workings of government. And I think that that's a fundamental principle that we can hold to and still ask and implore faith leaders to be part of political conversations. But the ways in which faith leaders, much like artists in our communities, have been used by politicians has been very instrumentalist. Politicians know they can do the numbers. That, for instance, in the Christian faith, on a Sunday morning at 9 a.m. across this country, there are hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people, who are sitting, in faith communities, who are sitting in churches. On Fridays, they get hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Muslims who are in, those faith congregations. And so they're going there because the numbers are there. And so faith communities need to see that they have power. When politicians are approaching you, you know that you have leverage. And that leverage is not only in the numbers, but also in the moral authority. And faith leaders should not just hand their moral authority over to politicians for free. They should hold them accountable. They should ask them hard questions. And they should make sure that when they take those platforms in their pulpits, that they're not taking those platforms in a way that they're unaccountable for. Because ultimately, the power that they hold as faith leaders is not only one that is seen in very light terms by the community. And so faith leaders must know that they have a moral responsibility, but also a political responsibility to not just give people platforms for free, but to hold them accountable for the things that it is that they promise.
And when you're saying for free, obviously you're not talking about, financial remuneration, but you're talking about,
absolutely,
I guess, the moral exchange that then takes place and their level of accountability between the faith leader and the politician. One example that you used in your story is the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu and how his relationship with politics was. Talk to us about that. You say that he entered the political sphere, but he entered it in his office and in his authority as a priest. Speak on that a bit.
We often forget that Desmond Tutu was never a politician. He was always a faith leader, but he saw his responsibility as one to pursue justice. And our politics needs to become about the pursuit of justice again, not just the pursuit of peace. When we went through our transition, peace was the highlight, but we need actually to bring in justice and care back into our political space. And again, faith leaders can play that role. But he importantly said something, a very famous quote of Desmond Tutu's that we don't speak about enough, where he says, we cannot just take the stance of neutrality because neutrality is not enough in the face of injustice. That when you are neutral, you are on the side of the oppressor as opposed to the oppressed. And the marginalized people of this society need faith leaders who have social capital, political capital, to stand up, moral capital, to stand up in the face of the injustice of people not having water, sanitation, people not having access to quality health care. All of those are injustices. And to be neutral in that time is really not enough. It's not enough. We talk about being apolitical in South African society, and we assume that being apolitical means you're not taking a partisan side, you're not choosing a party, but that's a different thing. That's being non-partisan. And while I encourage people to be non-partisan in the ways that they choose to be, we cannot be apolitical and not have a politics of care, a politics of justice, and use our power to act for the most marginalized in society. Faith leaders have that responsibility, and Desmond Tutu was a great example of why you don't need to go into politics to fight political battles on behalf of the oppressed.
So there are two schools here that you've presented, Tessa. There are the faith leaders who, as you say, will practice the politics of care and the politics of justice, as you phrase it, who are about healing and who are about hope. in their office as priests or in their office as faith leaders. And then you get those who are leaders as well in the faith sphere, but also have entered politics in a formalized fashion. I'm talking now about the ACDP, for example, and I don't know if this would be an appropriate one, but it does come to mind as I speak to you now. Mose Maimane, who himself is, a person of faith and has now formed a political party. Talk to me about the, formalization of the politics structure while you are still within the service as a faith leader.
Yeah, I think those faith leaders who decide to enter active politics have even a greater responsibility than those who don't. And again, it's in a few senses. The first, for me, importantly, is to enter that as a representative of a community of people that give you a mandate, rather than one who sees him or herself as a messianic figure that lords it over people. But more importantly, not to be instrumentalist, again, about faith. And I think we've seen a very shallow, undertaking when it comes to faith leaders entering politics, where it's about, the look and the feel and, just very top level ideas and quotables, rather than a real sense of a participatory process where you're really engaging the faith communities that you seek to serve, and not just saying, people will vote for me because I am Muslim and they are Muslim. People will vote for me because I'm Christian and they are Christian. We've not seen organizations based on faith principles really come out and engage society quite broadly on what it is that their principles are. There's been a bit of a instrumentalist laziness about using faith as a stance. And I think what is needed is a real substantive, both ideological conversation about what the ideas are that they stand for, but a real building of a constituency that gives you a mandate, one that you are accountable for.
Certainly a thought kicker and a conversation starter. Thank you very much. That's social activist Tessa Dooms, and talking about an article, commentary piece that she wrote in Sowetan Live.